The chandelier sparkled above the white marble floor as silverware clinked gently, until laughter cracked through the air like a whip. 3 women at table 7 were nearly in tears from giggling. "She probably thinks bonjour means the soup of the day," one of them whispered, not so quietly, glancing toward the only black maid in the room. The woman, dressed in a simple navy uniform, continued clearing plates, silently, gracefully, as if she hadn't heard a word. But then she paused, turned, looked directly at them, and in a voice like velvet said, "Mesdames, j'espère que le dîner était à la hauteur de vos manners." Silence. Forks froze. Mouths dropped. Even the pianist missed a note. Her name was Elise, 32 years old, a single mother who had traded textbooks for trays, lectures for linens, and a professor's podium for polished silver. Every morning before the sun broke across the skyline, she kissed her daughter Amar goodbye and boarded the first bus into the city. The ride was long, crowded, and silent, much like her days at Le Fleur Royale, the most luxurious hotel in the district. To the guests, she was invisible, the kind of person you never quite make eye contact with. They looked past her when they spilled wine, snapped fingers at her when they wanted more bread, whispered about her accent like it was an offense. "Don't forget to smile," her supervisor would say, more as a warning than advice. Elise would nod politely and return to clearing tables with the kind of grace you don't learn in housekeeping. But in surviving, she never complained. She listened. She observed. She watched as guests boasted about private jets and Paris trips while mispronouncing French wines on the menu. She memorized their patterns. Who tipped, who didn't, who left napkins stained with lipstick and lies. And still she smiled, because complaining doesn't buy school uniforms. It doesn't cover Amar's asthma medication. It doesn't matter when the world sees you as a background character in their 5-star fantasy. But behind her quiet eyes lived a woman the world had forgotten, not because she lacked brilliance, but because she wore it beneath an apron. The lobby doors of Le Fleur Royale parted like the gates of the palace as the Langfords walked in, trailed by the scent of imported perfume and generational entitlement. Vivian Langford, socialite, widow of a real estate tycoon and self-proclaimed tastemaker, led the procession in a cream-colored trench coat that cost more than Elise's monthly rent. Beside her strutted her daughter, Camille, 22, freshly returned from a fashion semester in Paris, though you'd think she'd been crowned Queen of France. She wore sunglasses indoors, though it was nearly dusk, and her heels clicked like punctuation marks as she marched to the concierge. Elise stood by the reception desk, tray in hand, waiting quietly to escort them to their penthouse suite. "Oh, how quaint," Vivian murmured, glancing at Elise as one might glance at a cracked teacup. "At least they're keeping things diverse." Camille scoffed, flipping her perfectly curled hair. "She better not touch my bags. My vintage Givenchy doesn't belong in peasant hands." They weren't whispering. They didn't need to. In their world, people like Elise weren't supposed to understand or matter. But Elise heard every word. Every syllable landed like a slap, sharp and deliberate. She said nothing, didn't flinch. Her face remained neutral, her eyes cast slightly downward, not in submission, but strategy. The bellhop assigned to carry their luggage fumbled with Camille's overpacked suitcases while she swiped through her phone, grumbling about how dirty Americans pronounce French brands. "You'd think someone working here would know basic Parisian etiquette," she said loudly, glancing at Elise again. "But I suppose that's asking too much." Vivian laughed in agreement, linking her arm with her daughter. They should at least teach the staff to smile in proper English, or in any language, really. Elise opened the elevator door for them, held it, nodded as they walked in, without a word of thanks. And yet in her silence, something stirred, not rage, not sorrow, but something older, a kind of stillness that comes before a storm. Because Elise didn't just understand their insults. She understood their language, both the spoken one, and the one they'd never expect her to speak fluently. She knew French, not tourist French, not textbook French, fluent, literary, poetic French. She had once lectured at Sorbonne, but now she carried trays and held elevator buttons. The elevator doors closed with a soft ding. sealing in two worlds, only one which they believed mattered. The Langfords' voices drifted down the corridor like a slow, sour perfume, audible even to the half-closed suite doors. Elise stood quietly outside with a fresh towel cart, organizing neatly folded linens with precision. She wasn't eavesdropping. She didn't have to. I mean, seriously, Mother. Camille's voice rang out. The staff here is tragic. That woman at the elevator? She barely spoke English. She mumbled like she was chewing rocks, Vivian replied, pouring herself a glass of imported mineral water. I don't understand why these luxury hotels insist on hiring people without refinement. Elisa's hand paused for a moment on a towel, fingers curling slightly. Inside, Camille continued, louder now, certain her insults wouldn't be understood. Honestly, if I had to be poor, I'd at least try to sound educated, not like someone raised in a broom closet. She laughed, sharp and hollow, and the way she looked at me, like she'd never seen a real Chanel bag before. I studied in Paris. For God's sake, I speak fluent French. I'd bet my last pair of Louboutins she doesn't even know what fromage means. Elise exhaled softly through her nose, not out of anger, but restraint. She adjusted the towels, took a step back, fixed her posture. She could storm in and shut it down with one sentence. Just one. A quote from Victor Hugo, perhaps, or Molière, delivered with perfect Parisian elegance. But not yet, not here, not now. She had learned long ago, power lands best when it's timed. Perfectly, the commotion started at the front desk, low at first, then rising with panic. A sharply dressed older man, holding a leather briefcase, stood speaking rapidly in French. The concierge nodded nervously, clearly not understanding. Is there anyone here who speaks French? The manager hissed, scanning the room. Anyone? The man gestured impatiently toward his reservation paper, his voice tightening. Je voudrais envoyer an email here concernant ma chambre avec vue sur le jardin. The lobby began to shift. Guests paused. The staff exchanged looks. Camille, seated nearby with her mother, chuckled. This should be fun. Someone find Henri from Valet, barked the manager. He took French in high school. Elise stepped forward from behind the flower arrangement she'd just been fixing. Calm. Still, invisible no longer. Excuse me, she said quietly, almost like a question. May I assist? The manager blinked. You speak French. Elise didn't answer. She turned to the guest and offered a soft smile. Monsieur, je suis désolé pour cette confusion. Je peux vous aider avec votre enregistrement et vous guider vers votre suite immédiatement. The man's face lit up with relief. Enfin, une personne civilisée. Merci infiniment, mademoiselle. Camille sat upright. The laughter faded from her lips. Elise continued effortlessly, gracefully switching dialects and adjusting tone, like someone who had done this her entire life. Avez-vous de preferences pour votre séjour? Nous pouvons organiser un dîner privé vous le souhaitez. The manager stood frozen. The concierge slowly lowered his phone. Even the pianist in the corner stopped playing mid-note. Vivian's mouth parted slightly. Camille stared, speechless, her eyes narrowing in disbelief. Elise didn't gloat. She didn't look back. She simply walked alongside the guest, guiding him toward the elevator, her voice a smooth river of flawless French. Elegant, professional, and unapologetically brilliant. And for the first time since arriving, the Langfords had nothing to say. The elevator chimed as Elise gently guided the French guests inside, continuing their fluent conversation like old acquaintances. She nodded with a warm smile and a slight bow before stepping out as the doors closed. The moment lingered. Staff, guests, even passing bellboys glanced her way, not as an invisible figure anymore, but as something far rarer in a place like this. Someone be respected. The hotel manager approached awkwardly, adjusting his tie. Elise, he began, clearing his throat. That was impressive. I didn't know you were fluent in French. I never had a reason to mention it, she replied softly. He chuckled nervously. Well, consider this your reason. That was the most professional guest interaction I've seen all month. From across the lobby, Vivian narrowed her eyes. Camille sat frozen, lips slightly parted, confusion twisting her perfectly made-up face. That wasn't beginner French, Camille muttered. That was Parisian. She spoke it better than my professor at Sorbonne, Vivian whispered back, stunned. Elise walked past them without breaking stride. Her tray balanced, her posture calm. Not arrogant, not performative, just deeply rooted in who she was. And that made it worse. Because she hadn't said anything to them. She hadn't gloated. She hadn't so much as looked their way. Yet somehow they had never felt smaller. Camille's cheeks flushed as a realization crept in. The woman she'd mocked, dismissed, and ridiculed might just be more cultured, more refined, and more intelligent than she'd ever be. The laughter from earlier felt distant now, like a bad echo from a room she no longer belonged in. Later that evening, Elise returned to the service lounge behind the kitchen, a small, quiet space meant for employees to take breaks. She sat at a narrow metal table, removed her apron, and opened a tattered notebook. Inside were handwritten vocabulary lists, pronunciation breakdowns, and flashcards, not for her, but for Amara. She smiled faintly, circling a French verb her daughter kept confusing. "Is this seat taken?" Came a voice from behind. Elise looked up. It was Mrs. Alvarez, the hotel's night cleaner, older, kind-eyed, and one of few who had taken the time to truly know her. "I heard about earlier," she said, sitting down. "You surprised everyone out there." Elise shrugged modestly. "It wasn't performance." "I know," Alvarez replied, "but it reminded me of who you really are." Elise paused and spoke quietly. "I was a professor back home. I taught linguistics and Francophone literature at the University of Dakar." Alvarez blinked, impressed. "And now this?" "My husband passed away suddenly. Heart failure. He was just 38. Elise's voice softened. "We had no family left. I brought Amara here for a better future. I thought I'd teach again." She looked down at her calloused hands. But the degrees didn't transfer. The job offers dried up. And without documentation, even tutoring became difficult. So I cleaned tables. I wiped floors. I did what I had to do. From behind the doorway, Camille froze just out of sight. She had come looking for her bracelet, which she thought she'd dropped earlier. But now she couldn't move. She stood there, absorbing every word, every truth that unraveled the image she had built. "She's brilliant," Camille whispered under her breath, her cheeks heating with shame. Back inside, Elise smiled faintly. "They see a maid, Mrs. Alvarez. They don't see a woman who once recited Voltaire by memory or guided students through Camus and Achebe. They don't see the sacrifices behind the silence." Mrs. Alvarez reached over and touched her hand gently. "But some of us do, Elise. And today, so did a few more." Just then, Camille stepped away from the door, quietly and quickly, but not before a single tear escaped down her cheek. The next morning, Elise was polishing the marble counter near the reading lounge when Camille approached. No heels, no sunglasses, no smirk. Just hesitation. "Hi," Camille said awkwardly, her voice lower than usual. Do you have a minute?" Elise glanced up, surprised. "Of course." Camille looked around to make sure her mother wasn't nearby, then stepped closer. "I, overheard you yesterday. Not on purpose. I was just, well, I heard what you said about being professor." Elise didn't respond immediately. She studied the young woman's expression. For once, there was no vanity in her eyes, just something close to respect. "I have this final French presentation due," Camille continued. "It's about cultural linguistics and tone shifts in conversation, but I don't really get it." She let out a nervous laugh. "I was just going to copy something from the internet, but after hearing you, I figured maybe I should try learning it properly." Elise tilted her head. "You want my help?" Camille nodded, a little embarrassed. "If you're willing, and if you don't hate me." Elise gave a soft, tired smile. "Hatred is heavy. I don't carry what I don't need." Camille looked down. "I said some horrible things. I judged you based on everything but the truth, and you still helped that guest. You didn't owe anyone kindness, but you gave it anyway." There was a long pause between them. "I used to think class was about money," Camille added, But after yesterday, I'm not so sure. Elise gently closed a cleaning cloth she'd been folding. Real class, she said, is how you treat people who owe you nothing. Camille met her eyes for the first time, really met them. Then I have a lot to learn. The Langfords stood at the grand checkout counter, their luggage neatly arranged, chauffeur waiting just outside. Camille was unusually quiet. No sighing, no complaining, just thoughtful. Elise, as always, stood near the elevator, back straight, hands folded, face calm. Then Camille stepped away from her mother and walked toward her, in front of staff, in front of other guests, in front of her mother's stunned eyes. "Ms. Elise," she said, her voice clear, "I just wanted to thank you, not for carrying bags or holding doors, but for showing me what true culture looks like." Elise blinked, taken aback. Camille continued, now holding a cream-colored envelope. "My final French presentation is next Friday. It's open to faculty and guests, and I'd be honored if you came. I'll even be quoting something from your lesson." Elise took the envelope slowly, not with disbelief, but with grace. Vivian gasped softly. "Camille," her daughter turned. "Mother, I think it's time we stop pretending we know everything." Before Elise could respond, the hotel manager approached nervously, holding a printed offer letter. "Elise," he said, clearing his throat, "after yesterday's remarkable events, corporate has asked if you consider joining our staff training team as a cultural and language consultant." The lobby went quiet for a moment. Elise looked at the letter, then at Camille, then at the young bellhop nearby, watching with wide, hopeful eyes. She smiled, not for recognition, but because for the first time in years, the world was seeing her clearly. "I'll consider it," she said, "but only if we also train in kindness." Camille smiled. Vivian said nothing. And as the Langfords exited to the glass doors, Elise remained behind, no longer a background character in someone else's story, but the author of her own. In a world obsessed with titles and appearances, we often forget that the most brilliant minds and compassionate hearts aren't always dressed in suits or seated in boardrooms. Sometimes they wear aprons. Sometimes they push linen carts. Sometimes they speak quietly until the world is finally ready to listen. Elise was never just a maid. She was a mother, a scholar, a survivor, and most of all, a reminder that dignity isn't given by others, it's carried within, and that real class, it's not inherited. It's practiced in silence, in strength, and in how we treat those we think can't teach us anything. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, because here, we believe that true power lies not in who speaks the loudest, but in who has the courage to speak when it matters most.